Austrian school economists are quite right. What happens if you do that is eventually it bursts, and what should have happened is the zombie bank should have been basically dismantled, and lots of people should have been sent to prison, and that didn't happen, did it?
Before we hear from Anthony Stansfield, leave the last word with you, Nicola, because it does seem like it's a different world to most people.
Yeah,
the bankers are operating in. Is it another planet?
Yeah, I think it is a planet. And I mean, the thing that I think is really sad is that rather than the Conservative Party hold the bankers to account, they've used this as an opportunity to blame the Labour Party for bankrupting the country and introducing their austerity programme, where we've seen disabled people committing suicide because they've had their benefits cut.
Yeah, it's not just disabled people either, is it? I mean, it's an amazing number. Anyway, let's hear from the Police and Crime Commissioner of the Thames Valley Police now.
I'm Anthony Stansfield, and I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner of Thames Valley. It's a very large force. We have the fourth largest population of any force in the country. The other big forces are metropolitan. We cover a vast area. It's Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Buckinghamshire.
Why have you taken this interest in the case here in Bristol with the Lloyds Business Support Unit?
Because some of the victims are in my area, in Thames Valley. And there's one farming family that I think went down over 100 million on this. The sums of money involved are absolutely vast. We did a very similar one to what is alleged to have gone on in Lloyds, Bristol. It was the HBOS case in Reading, and we prosecuted on 245 million. The actual case was probably nearer £1 billion. I have no reason to think this one is any smaller.
So what is alleged to be going on here in Bristol?
Well, if I can describe it very simply, and there are 101 variations. But say a company is worth 100 million. Doesn't matter if it's worth 1 million, 10 million or 100 million. But if say it's worth 100 million and it owes the bank £10 million, it has a loan to expand, it can call that £10 million loan in almost overnight. And unless the company is able to pay it back immediately, they bankrupt the company. And what seems to have happened, and it certainly happened in the HBOS case, is the bank got its money back and the assets of the company were sold off at a fraction of their real value to people who were cronies of the bank managers involved, and people made an enormous sum of money.
Well, what would you say to people who say, well, actually, since if I make a loan to you, it's within my rights to call it back whenever I wish. It's actually my money.
Well, the only country, practically, any major country that doesn't have what's called a Chapter 11 system in place. And that means that if you call a loan in, and the loan isn't one that they've always paid their interest on it, they've never defaulted. Every other country has what's called Chapter 11, and the company gets at least 3 months to pay the loan back. What happens in this country is you can do it overnight, and it's an absolute open gate for fraudsters and con men.
But you would say, maybe some people would say anyway, but yes, it's legal.
Yes, calling in the loan possibly is legal. What is totally illegal is to sell off the assets for vastly less than they're worth and then go for the personal guarantees of the directors of the company and regain vastly more than the original loan. That is not legal.
Can you give us an example of maybe one or two of the things you came across with the HBOS case, so we can get a picture of what may be going on in Bristol?
Companies were being taken to pieces and their assets sold for vastly less than they were really worth. And the fraudsters were making a huge amount of money out of this. And 6 people went down for an accumulative jail sentences of 48 years for this. I mean, it was a very, very serious fraud. One person got 15 years, and that is the heaviest you can possibly get for fraud.
Why do you think that there's so many victims, none of whom have yet got justice here in Bristol?
I think it's a combination of things. They are very, very similar. Some of the same individuals who were involved in HBOS seem to have been involved in Bristol. I don't believe that the police investigations have been anything like thorough enough. Most of the victims haven't even been approached, or they've approached the police and they've just been told, go away. I think it's a totally unsatisfactory situation. I think this particular branch of this particular bank, which was Lloyds, seems to have been the centre of it for this particular bank all over the country. I mean, it's not just in the southwest. These are victims are from Northern Ireland to Scotland, right across the country. And most of the cases seem to go back to Lloyds recoveries in Bristol.
Sue Mount-Stevens, who's our Police and Crime Commissioner. What would you advise her to do?
Well, I would have a very good look at who's been advising the police, for a start. One of the alleged involvements was from the very solicitors who are still the solicitors to Avon and Somerset Police, and I find that extraordinary. I'm not going to go into Sue Mount-Stevens on a personal basis, but I certainly, as PCC, have taken a very keen interest in seeing these sort of cases are taken forward. I cannot force the police, but I take them personally very, very seriously, and I try to ensure that the police take them seriously.
Also, of course, there will be bankers who say, well, everybody's at it, Anthony. RBS have been doing this, HBOS have been doing it, all the banks do it, and if you're going to single out Lloyds in Bristol, that's simply not fair.
Well, it just happens to be where it's being done from. HBOS was being done largely from Reading. RBS was largely being done from Scotland, from branches there. So it's where it starts, and it's not a question of being fair or not. If they've been committing fraud, it should be investigated properly, wherever it is.
And what would you say to those that talk about the banksters in the 2008 crisis? It does seem it's not just too big to fail, it's also too big to jail.
I wouldn't use the word banksters, I would use the word fraudsters. Most of them aren't even qualified bankers. I think Lloyds has on its board of about 16 or 17 people. It only has one qualified banker, which I find extraordinary. And I think that's one of the things that's gone wrong. And it's not all the banks that have done this. I mean, certain banks' names come up the whole time. And it was HBOS, Lloyds, RBS and Clydesdale seem to be the main offenders in this, but I think there have been bank managers in other banks who have done it, but not on the industrial scale that it was done on in these banks, I believe.
Do you think that there is an element in these risk committees of these banks that think, well, if we can carry on getting away with this, we're making a tremendous amount of money at it, so why stop?
Yes, I think that's been the problem. Unless you bring these things to justice, in America they're much better at it, and they do put bankers in jail. We have not put a single serious senior person on a bank board in jail, and it should have been done. And if you want to have a look at the criminality of this, you need to read what is called the Masterton Report, or the Turnbull Report, which has been now published. I read it 2 or 3 years ago. It names the names and it names the companies, and it is an absolute layout of criminality in a very large bank.
Well, you're painting a picture almost of a lawless nation when it comes to bankers.
I think we have a real problem, not just with bankers, but with some of our major legal practices. And I think a number of other professions have been involved in this, which I think is really depressing. I was managing director of a company. We worked all over the world. And I always found that other countries were fairly corrupt. And I never really expected to find how corrupt we have become at a senior level in our professions in this country, and I find it absolutely disgraceful. But it's very interesting. In Australia, something very, very similar to this happened, and it caused really the 2 prime ministers to lose their jobs, and they had a proper royal commission into this, which produced its interim report earlier this year, which was absolutely devastating about this. And funnily enough, the 2 Australian senators who brought that royal commission forward were in the UK last week, and I had a meeting with them, and they said ours has absolute similarities to what they had. In America, in the cases of the many, many forged signatures that are used to take people to true bankruptcy courts, the banks were fined, the biggest fine ever in America, I believe. It was $25 billion for doing this. And in this country, we have done absolutely precisely nothing, really, to bring it to justice, yes, except for the Thames Valley HBOS case.
Now, you mentioned a report just then. Do you think there is any other sources of information that might arm those, either survivors or victims of Lloyds Business Support Unit, or those trying to get justice for them, their supporters?
Yes, I think there are. I think the Turnbull Report is the absolute key one. It's been sitting with the SFA and the Financial Conduct Authority for far too long, and nothing has been done about it yet. There are other reports. I can't go into their names. I can't remember off the top of their head. But there is ample evidence for this, and there is ample evidence that those who should be investigating it are not investigating it.
I mean, we've got lots of agencies that are supposed to be doing this kind of thing. You mentioned the Serious Fraud Office, the National Crime Agency, Action Fraud, people like this.
I think one one easy ways to put these things off is always to say somebody else is investigating it. And we have, as you say, a number of agencies, and they shuffle these prosecutions amongst themselves. And even when you have a case that looks absolutely clear, it'll go to the Crown Prosecution Service, and they find it all too difficult, and nothing is done about it.
I've just read this new book about the death of David Kelly, Dr. David Kelly, which, of course, was in the Thames Valley area.
It happened before my time. I don't know the details, and I think most police officers involved have retired now. But certainly when you look at it, it seems at best odd, doesn't it?
Bit cheeky of me to ask Anthony Stansfield about the death of David Kelly right at the very end there. But Martin, there's a whole series of, I think, fascinating things he's coming up with there, not least of which the same solicitors apparently are advising Lloyds as are advising Avon and Somerset Police.
Yeah, well, we had Andy Marsh, the Chief Constable, in here some months ago, didn't we? And we did discuss fraud in a general way. And, of course, we mentioned the Blue Arrow case from many years ago in the City of London, because we had Rowan Bosworth Davies on this show, who was a Chief Fraud Officer for the Metropolitan Police.
Well, that's right. That was a few years ago, but what he said was that he submitted to the Finance Select Committee his little report, and he was an ex-fraud squad detective, and he said, well, actually, the City of London is analogous to organised criminal activity, and what he was actually saying was it fulfills all the criteria of various different international definitions of organised crime. So if you have basking in the sun one day in the next few weeks in Castle Park, maybe if you've got a camera, take a few photographs of people going in and out of the business support unit, exercise your right to take photos of people. You may see some of them in the news.